Welcome back to another episode of Unity in Minutes. In our previous tutorial, we used ray casting, a mechanism that is used in shooting bullets. In that episode, we made the object that was shot at disappear. In today's episode, we are going to make it explode, or at the very least, derez.
No.
To make this derezing possible, we will need to make a prefab of smaller cubes. We will replace this cube by the prefab when it gets shot using a C# script. First, duplicate the cube by clicking Ctrl D and drag it out. Create an empty game object. Let's call it Broken Cube. Let's drag the newly made cube and make it a child of the Broken Cube game object. Let's create a folder called Prefabs. We will drag the Broken Cube game object into the prefab folder. This creates a prefab of the Broken Cube, which is basically a container of information of this game object. As you can see, we can drag it out as so and create an exact copy of the game object. Now let's delete these. Double-click the Broken Cube prefab to open this window. Right-click and pick Reset to reset the transform. We will have to create smaller constituent cubes. To do so, reduce each linear dimension of this cube by half and shift it to a corner of the bigger cube. Click Ctrl D to duplicate and move it to the adjacent location. Now, selecting both, click Ctrl D again and we can form half the cube. Repeat this to complete the cube. Now, going back to the scene and bringing the Broken Cube out, we can see that it has 8 small constituent cubes. Let us add a rigid body component to our enemies. Go to the right, add component and click rigid body. Let's repeat this to all the smaller cubes in Broken Cube. This will allow them to be affected by gravity and will also make them like real physical objects. Let's add tags to the cubes so that we can identify them in the script. Go to this tab, add tag. Press the plus button. Let's call it small cube. Save. Select all the cubes and add this tag to them. Let's go back to the scene. We will now write a script so that our block will get replaced by our prefab on getting shot. We will then apply a force to simulate the explosiveness. Open the gun's C# script. Our current code casted a ray on the bullet shoot action and then checked if an enemy was hit and, if so, destroyed the enemy. Firstly, we need to create a public reference to the Broken Cube game object. Let's make another variable of the type transform and let's call it hit location. This will store the location of the enemy which was shot. We will use this location to spawn our prefab. We will now use instantiate. This spawns the game object at the input location rotation. The first argument is what it is to spawn, that is our Broken Cube. The second is the location and the third is the rotation. We have now cloned the prefab to the required location. The only thing left to do is to apply an explosive force to the constituent cubes. To do so, we must create a list of the objects to apply forces on. Let's create a public float radius. This will be the range at which we will check for game objects. We will now use a collider array to store these game objects. Let's call it nearby objects. Using the function physics overlap sphere, which essentially casts a sphere around the given point and returns the game object inside it. It has 2 arguments, the location, which in this case will be the hit location, and the radius. This will give us an array of the nearby objects on which we have to apply the force. To do this, we must individually apply the force to each object and thus must use a loop. This will loop through every object in the nearby object list. We will only need to apply forces to the small cubes. This will be done using the compare tag. Now, to apply force, we need to know its rigid body component. We will assign this to a variable, let's call it RB. We must now create a reference to the force. This will be done using add explosion force. This function has three arguments. The first is the amount of force to be applied. The second is the point from which we will apply the force. This will be the hit location. And the third is the radius. This is the radius till which the force acts. Let's now save this script. As you can see, these three arguments have been updated in the inspector. Drag and drop the prefab here. Let's use a radius of 1 and a force of 500. As you can see, our explosions are working flawlessly.
And that, fellow game devs, brings this tutorial to an end. I hope you found this helpful. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tune in next week for another episode of Unity in Minutes.